Call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, December 7th, 2017. The time is 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Giza.
Here.
Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Ballard.
Here.
Trustee Sedeby.
Here.
Trustee Peters.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Haley.
Thank you very much. If you'll please join us with the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and good evening. It's nice to see a lot of folks in attendance tonight. It's nice when people come out to see us. And to those of you watching at home, if you are here with us tonight and you would like to make a comment to the board at any point, I just ask that you be recognized by me and that you make your comment from the podium so that everybody at home can hear and see what you have to say. So first up this evening is public comment. Would anyone like to address the board at this point? You're also welcome to wait till a given agenda item if you would like to wait and make your comments at that particular time. Hearing none, we'll move on. First up is the village president's report. I have an ordinance authorizing the issuance of an A1 Class A liquor license this evening. The president acts as the liquor commissioner here in Riverside, and when a business changes hands, if they have an existing liquor license, that license expires. And so it's the duty then of the board to authorize the issuance of a new license so that the new business can take over the license. And on November 15th of this year, we received a business license and a liquor license application from Mr. Robert Rosowski on behalf of R Marts Riverside LLC. R Marts Riverside LLC is purchasing the Minuteman gas station and convenience store that's located at 3346 South Harlem Avenue in Riverside. Minuteman currently holds a Class A1 liquor license, and the new owner is seeking to have a similar liquor license issued to him. This is the sale of the business and not the property. The ownership of the property will not change. And additionally, the management team that currently operates the business will be staying on to continue the new business. The applicant has submitted the required documents, and our staff has reviewed them, and they've all passed fine. Mr. Rosowski has experience operating this type of business in other locations and has satisfactorily completed the background check and other necessary requirements. So with that, I would ask for a motion and a second to authorize the issuance of a Class A1 liquor license to R Marts Riverside LLC.
So,
Motion by Mr. Jesus, second by Mr. Ballerine. Any questions or concerns? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Ballard.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters. Aye.
Motion carries. The only other thing I wanted to mention this evening, at our last meeting, we had a discussion about the Veterans Memorial renovation. There was some consideration given to having the LAC reconsider some of the plans. In further conversations with Ms. Maloney, the chairperson, we think it's a more efficient way to do this if we have Ms. Maloney work with our village staff, given the direction that the board gave last time for the design and renovation of the memorial. So we're going to have a committee formed. Mr. Lumsden is going to be on the committee along with Ms. Maloney and, of course, Ed Bailey, our Director of Public Works, and we'll figure out exactly the process by which to renovate the memorial next year. And that is all I have. Manager Francis.
I do not have a report this evening.
Moving on to the approval of the consent agenda. Oh my heavens. I am required by law to read this to you. So it's long. So yeah, hold your applause. Settle in. This evening's consent agenda is approve the voucher list of bills for December 7, 2017. Approve the Village Board of Trustees public hearing minutes for the 2017 proposed tax levy. for the Village of Riverside and the Riverside Public Library, and the public hearing minutes for the proposed 2018 budget for the Village of Riverside and the Riverside Public Library. That was November 16, 2017. Approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes November 16, 2017, and file and review the following: Board of Fire and Police Commissioner meeting minutes August 15, Parks and Recreation Board meeting minutes September 25, Police Department monthly report October 2017. The Police Department's third quarter 2017 statistical report. Ordinances adopting the 2017 tax levy for 2018 collection for the Village of Riverside, County of Cook, State of Illinois, and the Riverside Public Library, Village of Riverside, County of Cook, State of Illinois. Ordinances adopting the annual budgets for the year commencing January 1, 2018, and ending December 31, 2018 for the Village of Riverside and the Riverside Public Library. A resolution directing the reduction of 2017 tax levies by Cook County Tax Extension Office if necessary. An ordinance abating the tax hereto levied for the year 2017 to pay the principal and interest on a $2,250,000 general obligation refunding bond, alternate revenue source, Series 2010A of the Village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois. An ordinance abating the tax hereto levied for the year 2017 to pay the principal and interest on a $2,175,000 general obligation refunding bond, Series 2011 of the Village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois. Halfway there. An ordinance abating the tax hereto levied for the year 2017 to pay the principal and interest on a $1,420,000 general obligation refunding bond, Series 2013 for the Village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois. A resolution authorizing a $687,841 interfund transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund to fund future capital expenditures. A resolution authorizing the village manager to create a purchase order in the amount of $1 million for the 2018 purchase of water from the Village of McCook. A resolution authorizing the village manager to create a blanket purchase order in the amount of $30,000 for 2018 fleet fuel purchases. A resolution of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, authorizing the village manager to issue a purchase order to Client First Consulting Group, LLC, for information technology services in the amount of $47,000 for 2018. A resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a renewal of a tree and stump removal and emergency storm response service contract in the amount of $40,000 with D. Ryan Tree and Landscape Service, LLC, for 2018. And a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a renewal of a janitorial services contract with Eco Clean Maintenance in the amount of $25,560 for 2018 janitorial services at village facilities. Do any of these items need to be removed for discussion by the trustees? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion in a second to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by, who made the motion? By Mr. Lumsden, second by Mr. Pollock. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Setterby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carried. Next up are reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. We have an update this evening from Chief Weitzel on recent accomplishments and awards received by Detective Sergeant Coder, Officer Hamilton, and Officer in Charge Greenewald. Chief Weitzel.
Good evening, Mr. President, trustees, and manager. Normally I would have the officers here, but actually two of the officers are actually working out there right now handling calls and are unable to come in, and the third officer is out of state. So I'll just update the board very shortly on their awards recently. So Detective Sergeant Leo Coder was given a very prestigious acknowledgement by the Illinois Tactical Officers Association at a banquet out at the Doubletree in Oakbrook recently for a very violent situation that took place in June of 2017 when a murder suspect worked his way to Lyons from a homicide in Sycamore. There was an exchange of gunfire. Our officer was involved in that. And so was two Illinois State Troopers and a Lyons police officer. And they successfully stopped that offender from continuing to fire on the officers. So they were awarded an award of bravery. The two state troopers, Sergeant Coder and Officer DeLesh from Lyons, received bravery awards from the president of the Illinois Tactical Officers Association. There were 680 people at that banquet, and it was very, very well attended. I was very honored to go there and see him receive that award. In addition, Officer Isaac Hamilton was given an appreciation award by Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists for drunk driving arrests. His was kind of significant in the fact that until recently he was working day shift. He is now on the 3 to 11 shift, but he made 50 DUI arrests on day shift, which is highly unusual. So he was awarded I presented that award to him at roll call with the executive director, Rita Kressling from the Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists. And finally, Brian Greenewald was recertified as what's called a DRE officer in Illinois, which is a drug recognition expert. And that's somebody that can testify and prosecute cases for drugged driving, which we're seeing more of with cannabis and opioid abuse. And what was significant about his recertification is initially he was certified by the state of Illinois. He was recertified by the state of Illinois and the International Chiefs Association out of Virginia. In addition to that, he is currently training to be an instructor. He's one of only 106 officers in the entire state of Illinois to reach that milestone. And it's because it's very difficult. There's a lot of math. There's a lot of pharmacology involved in it. Making arrests for drugged driving is extremely complicated. It's extremely time-consuming, and it takes an expert. So under Illinois law, you can't a patrolman can't arrest somebody for drugged driving. Currently, if one of my other officers stops somebody suspected of narcotics, being under the influence of either legal prescription drugs or illegal, you have to call a DRE officer in to conduct that investigation for court purposes. The courts in Illinois do not recognize just patrolmen without the DRE certification as witnesses in court. So a lot of those arrests don't happen. If you think in Illinois the amount of police agencies, there's only 106 police officers in the entire state with that designation. You're probably going to see that go up because, as you're probably well aware, there's a big push in Illinois to make recreational cannabis legal, totally legal outside of the medical marijuana. And if that happens, the laws will have to change. And each agency will be required by law to have a DRE officer, which the state does not require now. So I just thought I'd brief the board on those accomplishments, and thank you.
Thank you, Chief Weisel. Please tell the officers how proud we are of them.
Thank you.
They're representative of the kind of police officers we have in Riverside, which are extraordinary. So next up are ordinances and resolutions. We're going to have to do a little shuffling of the agenda at this point, just to kind of explain to everybody what's going on here. Back on November 2nd, we had a general discussion regarding video gaming in Riverside, and we postponed to complete that discussion until tonight's meeting. In the interim, we found out from our village attorneys that it would be possible, if the board so chooses, to put a referendum, an advisory referendum, on the March ballot in 2018 concerning video gaming. So it doesn't really make any sense to talk about the referendum until we complete our general discussion that we put off from last November. So we're going to go to item C under considerations, which is the continued discussion regarding video gaming. And Manager Francis is going to introduce this for us.
Certainly. So the last discussion was conducted on November 2nd, 2017. The village board discussed the matter, but did not direct staff to draft an ordinance at that time related to video gaming. Residents attended the meeting and provided feedback to the village board. The board requested that staff provide a timeline regarding an advisory referendum. So included within the agenda packet is a potential timeline. At the November 16th meeting, the village board discussed timeline for a referendum and directed the village attorney to draft a question for review and discussion and possible action on December 7th. Included, as I mentioned, in the agenda packet is a referendum timeline. As you had mentioned, there are two elections in 2018, the general primary election on March 20th, 2018, and the general election November 6, 2018, the referendum question may be on ballots of either election. The last day for municipalities to place advisory referendum questions on the March 20th general primary election ballot by resolution is January 2nd, 2018, and that is the reason why it is placed on this particular agenda. And also included is a timeline for the November 6, 2018 election.
So where we left off in November 2nd was we didn't have a full board. There was a desire of everybody here to have a complete board present to finish this discussion. So the issue before us at that time was whether or not we wanted to move forward with having a draft ordinance prepared with an eye toward possibly permitting video gambling in Riverside. So that's where we are. So we'll just pick it up there, and I'll just open the floor to the trustees if you have further things that you would like to discuss on that point. No? I've been waiting for a month.
I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did watch the video, and I thought everything that needed to be said was said. My position was made clear, and I think everyone else had the opportunity to state their position, so I really don't see a need for a whole lot of additional discussion unless someone's got new questions or new opinions or comments to offer.
Is there anyone in the audience that wanted to address this, please?
Good evening. My name is Kathy Gilroy. As a volunteer, I have spent 22 years studying gambling and advising and working with government leaders, nonprofit groups, and individuals on this issue. No one has paid me to be here, nor do I profit in any way from opposing gambling. In 2009, the Video Gaming Act gave each Illinois municipality the opportunity to remain free of legal slot machines. At that time, Riverside wisely chose to continue to ban one-armed bandits. What has changed to bring this issue before you again? The non-gambling addicted public does not want legal gambling devices near their homes. They loathe the prospect of it. Only gambling pushers do. They call it gaming to make it sound less harmful. Making a harmful activity legal does not remove the harm. It simply changes the legal consequences. It's a fact that many who gamble become addicted. The proximity of slot machines to homes increases the number of gamblers who become addicted. It's called convenience gambling for that reason. Gambling is no less addictive now than it was in 1998 when you last banned it. It's more addictive. Why do you think it was banned previously? Slot machines are designed to maximize time on device according to the book Addiction by Design, until what the industry calls player extinction, meaning the gambler's funds are completely gone. If you allow slots, whom do you nominate to become addicted in Riverside? This board has no duty to level the playing field for bars. This board does have a duty to the welfare of residents, not just liquor licensees desiring to make a huge profit from the often devastating losses of their customers' money in slot machines. For one business to make an extra $100,000 per year, as was mentioned at a previous meeting, Riverside gamblers would lose almost $300,000, which would require feeding about $4 million per year through the slots in one business. What do addicted gamblers do when their funds are gone? Some beat up their spouses or abuse their children. Which Riverside families are you willing to inflict that harm on? Some addicted gamblers embezzle from their employers or other innocents like Little Leagues, Boy Scouts, and schools. Which Riverside businesses or nonprofit organizations are you willing to allow to go bankrupt from a gambling-addicted employee or volunteer? Some addicted gamblers rob banks or other businesses. Which Riverside banks or businesses are you willing to allow to be burglarized? Some addicted gamblers commit suicide. Which Riverside lives are you willing to sacrifice? These crimes do not show up in police reports about crime in or near gambling joints, which is what police chiefs cite. Yet, according to the California Council on Problem Gambling, over 60% of addicted gamblers commit crimes to support their habit. Anyone who thinks there's no harm associated with bringing gambling into a town has not studied the issue at all. Don't limit your discussion to benefits. You must discuss the harm, too. A local business owner at the panel discussion said he would like to have 5 magic money boxes in his business. How much business would he lose if his customers' money went into those boxes elsewhere in town? Is that a level playing field for him and other non-liquor pouring Riverside businesses? Only route outfits, who are usually out-of-towners and receive 35% of gamblers' losses, say yes. The public vehemently says no. By their silence, the majority of Riverside liquor license holders say no. Therefore, the board should say no and continue to maintain the family-friendly, gambling device-free character of Riverside. No referendum needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So the question, I guess, for us up here then is there any interest in reconsidering the prohibition, the current prohibition on video gaming? Mr. Pollock?
My answer would be no.
Mr. Giese?
With regard to the ordinance or with regard to the
With regard to
referendum?
the ordinance.
The ordinance, I mean, I'm leaning more towards a referendum and giving the residents an opportunity to vote for it.
So you don't want to proceed with the ordinance?
No, that's okay, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Munson?
I think I'd prefer to have I would prefer if we had the village prepare a draft for our village residents to review and then allow us to vote on that. But I also have no issues since both those for and those against have asked for a referendum. So I would support that as well, so that then the village residents could vote on that.
Okay.
I agree.
I'm against an ordinance. I am also against a referendum.
Okay. So the ordinance question is taken care of, that we will not proceed further with regard to the ordinance. So now we back up to the consideration of the resolution providing for and requiring the submission of a non-binding advisory public question. So, Manager Francis?
If I may, I just wanted to notify residents at home, if you're watching this on RTV, on our various cable channels, you're probably hearing us, but you may not be seeing us. The live stream on YouTube is working. There's a connectivity issue. Riverside TV is working on it right now. The rebroadcast will have both video and audio. However, if you want to watch both, please go onto your computer, onto YouTube to watch the live broadcast. Sorry, I was just notified of that.
So we should have everything good next time, because the first time we didn't have audio, this time we didn't have. Okay, so.
At least we have an alternate option, redundancy, so.
Well, I think we all understand the timing issue with regard to the referendum. The question that the attorney drafted for us to consider is a very simple one, and the referendum question would be, should the Village of Riverside allow video gaming? So that is the discussion before us. So before we have our debate, I would ask for a motion to approve a resolution providing for and requiring the submission of a non-binding advisory public question concerning video gaming.
Do you want to put on the date?
It would be on the March 20th.
Okay, so that should be part of the.
Oh, no, we just have to do this first. We have to get the motion made and seconded, and then we have the comment. No, we're not doing anything.
Before you go for a motion, I'm confused about the last action.
Sorry?
Trustee Lumsden said that he wanted an ordinance.
But he said
Trustees Ballerini and Sadovy said they agreed.
No, I want the referendum. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you don't want an ordinance.
Correct.
Okay.
And I agree with Trustee Lumsden's comment, but I can also count, so.
Okay. Right. right,
So it's 4-2
yes,
against
against,
drafting an ordinance. Got it.
correct,
Sorry, I wasn't clear.
yeah. Okay, so now, so we can have our discussion, we need a motion in a second.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ballerine, second by Trustee Lumsden. Okay, so time for discussion. You're welcome to speak at this point if you would like, or
Thank you, President Salz and the board, for letting us speak today. My name is Chris Tokars, and I live at 26 Northgate. I am here today to ask the board to finally vote to reaffirm the ban on gambling and to do it in a way that doesn't allow this issue to come back up anytime soon. When this topic was initially raised by 2 restaurant owners in 2015, we saw a significant pushback against the idea. Over 200 residents signed a petition within 24 hours. The local newspaper even wrote an article on the strong pushback by residents. The topic carried into early 2016, where it was then shelved. Then, in 2017, the same restaurant owner asked the village to re-examine it. So despite the recent and measurable opposition to the idea, the topic was reopened. As anyone who has attended these board meetings can clearly see, there is again a very strong pushback against video gambling. Despite the obvious opposition by residents, this issue seems to be continuing without any end. 2015, 2016, 2017. It's time for it to stop. It is a strongly held belief with professional politicians that a few letters from constituents often represent the opinions of thousands of other voters. Clearly here, the majority of people in attendance are opposed to video gambling, and I think that this room is representative of the village at large. The board should take notice. From my interactions with my neighbors, I am of the opinion that there is now a considerable number of residents that are not only against video gambling, but that are angry that a self-interest minority is being allowed to routinely threaten the residents in this town with video gambling. For the good of this community, this has to stop. And this issue has to be dealt with in a way that will keep this from allowing any of these special interests to reopen the topic in the future. Thank you.
anyone else like to address the board at this point?
Well, I want to speak in a minute to Lizzie Morrison, but I wanted to know who about the ballot referendum. I mean, a couple people have just said that you're for it, a couple of the trustees, but I don't, other than Trustee Ballerine saying at the last meeting that you were for it, who is asking, I'm sorry, who is asking for the ballot referendum, other than the 3 trustees?
Well, several people that were against gambling asked for it to be a referendum and wanted it to be, said it should be voted by the people. It was all over the Facebook page. So all we're doing is taking our direction from the people that were on the anti-gambling page.
Okay, so in terms of you bringing that up last time, that was a possible way to continue the conversation, and you feel because of the conversation.
It's not my goal was to continue the conversation.
Okay.
My goal was to allow everyone to have a say. And there are a lot of people in this village, and there are some people that want to have a say. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't agree with referendums. I don't think they're a good way of doing business. But in this case, I think it's a good idea because, again, many of the people that are opposed for gambling at the very beginning, that's all they did was yell for a referendum. So that's where the idea came from.
Okay, I don't know that that's the case in terms of who actually want it. I do ask why you think that you're going to get all of the village to vote to the input. You, Trustee Lumsden, have talked about the 90+% that we haven't heard from. I don't think 1,000 people voted at the last election in 2014. I don't think 800 people voted. So in the Riverside Village. So I don't know where you would, that this is an event that would get or that other 90% involved because people don't vote. I think it's more important that you speak and listen to the people that are actively involved in the discussion because they have been here. They've been talking about it online. We've been talking to you. We've been writing to you. The people that
really have strong inputs are, are in this, are involved in the conversation. So, and I will keep, since I'm here, I'll continue with what I was going to say, sorry. I think that, so from that perspective, I don't know it will accomplish much in terms of getting a majority of what the village wants in this, because people don't vote. I have the concern because there are very strong opinions on this, obviously, either way. In the people that are having the conversation, there's really strong opinions. And because people care about this village, that's why you all volunteer, that's why people are involved and come here. And it has been divisive among the board, both because you have different opinions and also around the process. I think there's certainly a conflict between a large group of people who don't want it and the fact that we're still discussing it. So there's definitely a conflict there. I don't think there's a conflict in the larger community because I haven't seen a lot of people saying they want gambling. So I don't think it's been divisive necessarily and publicly in the community. I'm very concerned that it will be if it goes onto the ballot. And so I'm concerned that it's not going to be something that brings us together, that talks about what we could build on together to improve the village. I'm also really concerned about outside companies coming and getting involved. You've said that you haven't heard from gambling operators and no other businesses have asked for this, which the fact that no other business have asked is kind of why are we still talking about it, but we'll put that aside. Gambling operators, when they find out there's a referendum, get involved and spend money. In Forest Park 2 years ago, when it was on, the citizens got a binding referendum on the ballot, and the gambling operators came in and spent money to get other ballot referendums on that knocked the binding referendum off the ballot. They spent $6 a signature, like they had people paid to go collect signatures for those other ballots. So my concern is I would rather have the people involved in the discussion and then involved in the room and involved in the community make this decision without some business entity that doesn't care about the village being a part and spending money to try and impact that decision. So that's a real concern of mine. I think, obviously they're facts and we all have a different set of facts. Some of it's all the same. We have different tallies as kind of to who's for that we either have or we haven't kind of kept track of. And, we have a lot of the same data. But I think the other piece of it is there's a lot of it, this is emotional. Obviously, people feel strongly. That's because we care about the community. I think the common denominator is that people care and want to support our businesses and want to grow and want to strengthen. I don't think that anybody involved in any of this conversation does not want that to happen. So I think that's an emotional, and real passionate thing. I think there are other emotional things. People are afraid if businesses go out of business. People are afraid if crime goes up. People are afraid if our property values go down because of gambling. As they, I want, if my older neighbor down the street decides to sell her house, I want her to be able to sell it, have a family comes in that spends money to renovate and that, contributes to the community. And so that's a fear and something that's, kind of emotional that people that affect this in it. And I know, Trustee Gisa, you mentioned on a totally different issue that Riverside isn't just your home, it's your family legacy. And that's a real, I don't know how gambling fits in that, but certainly the businesses, and strengthening businesses fit in that. So I know that kind of emotional piece is really hard, and that's part of what can be even more polarizing, especially if this is around for 3 more months and waiting for a referendum. And I'm concerned about the damage of that. I think that really all of us involved want to be heard and have been and are. I think the people that aren't involved in this conversation maybe aren't concerned about it. And I know you've listened and are continuing to, but I think it could do a lot more harm when there are other issues before the board and other issues before the community. I know you talked about the facility studies and where are we going with that planning as being something really important to work on in 2018. I would think you'd want resident input on something like that that's going to strengthen and build the village and where we're going than resident input on something that's dividing us all apart so that we weren't together. So those are my reasons why I'm definitely against the ballot referendum and including this on it, because I think it's going to do a lot more harm than good. And I know, you've mentioned that you don't like ballot. I know President Sells, you have Trustee Ballery and Trustee Sedevi, you've talked about if a referendum is how you usually govern. I think the people who aren't involved and have asked you all to be here on the board want you to make the decision on many things and expect that. So that's in terms of what a ballot referendum is. So I don't think there should be a referendum. I don't think there should be an ordinance allowing video gaming. I also think if we're in terms of the language, because it's not a binding referendum, we do have more options, as the attorney said, on the language on that, and I would want it to be video gambling instead of gaming, because it's not required. I mean, it's not part of the act. This is a binding. And I think I've had people say, well, gaming, isn't that what kids do on the Xbox? I mean, who don't know what video gaming is as in terms of slots. So I think that's a concern as it goes to people in the community that that may not be involved, that don't know that video gaming is gambling. So I think that would be very important as well. I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Amy Jaksic, 340 Olmsted. After listening to Lindsay, I realize I have some overlap with her, but I wanted to make sure that this was on the record. More than 500 village residents have emailed, spoken, and/or signed a petition stating that they are against video gambling in the village. No community response of this magnitude has been seen by a Riverside Village Board in at least the past decade. Extending what has become a truly divisive gambling conversation between village leaders and the community could erode public trust, and it will undermine the effectiveness and legitimacy of this board and its ability to move the village forward in a positive and productive way. Trustee Lumsden had shared that 23 residents were willing to reach out to him and not his fellow board members or to speak publicly about their pro-gambling stance. These are 23 people who are not willing to associate their names with their opposition to bringing gambling to Riverside versus the 500-plus residents who are willing to openly take a stand against gambling. I want to remind you, and this is something that Lindsay touched on, that just 13% of eligible Riverside voters showed up to cast their ballots in 2015. If the goal of this referendum is to reach a broader audience, it won't happen at the polls, making this whole exercise a waste of time. You have more than 500 residents willing to go on record against gambling versus the 23 that Trustee Lumsden referenced that approached him but wished to remain anonymous. If there are board members looking for direction from the community on this issue, I don't know what more you'd need than this. You are elected in our representative democracy to lead, and you need to do so based on the overwhelming feedback that you have received against gambling. Thank you.
You know, before you sit down, just one thing that you said, and I know I'm going to regret this, but I came in front of the board 9 years ago with 1,100 names on a petition, as well as 95% of a referendum. And that board looked at me and said, "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
And turned away. So I'm just saying. So
Okay.
I still think that a referendum is the right way to go. It allows everyone to have a say. And I know it's a non-binding referendum, but I will give you my word that if it comes as a negative against gambling, I will fight tooth and nail while I sit here or as long as I'm a resident in this village to make sure gambling does not come in this village. I consider it a binding referendum, even though it's not. I give you my word.
I'd like to hear that.
Which is
what everybody else has to say about that.
Which is a lot more than boards before me have done when I came with a 95% referendum.
I'd like to hear what your fellow trustees have to say about that same topic then, whether they'd be fighting for it or not.
I think the reason I'm supporting a referendum is because we've been asked by both sides. I mean, and again, I do think that since the last time we had a chance to meet with the folks that had contacted me, there has been more that have continued to contact all of us against. So I think that that's, I don't know if we have 500 or whatever that is. But again, I think that my biggest concern with some items that you mentioned, and we talked about it on the train, I mean, I've had great dialogue about this since we've had this discussion, which I see as a positive thing, because that's the way we get information, right? My concern right now is if it goes to a binding, and we're not considering a binding referendum, right? Because a binding referendum, help me out, Lance, that would require a certain percentage of the village to bring it to us in a binding format, correct?
That is correct, and also, under the statute, the only binding referendum can be a negative binding referendum. It can only be, they only provide for citizens to say no by referendum in a binding way. So the only way to ask the question, an open-ended question, shall it be allowed, since you currently ban it, is to phrase it this way and make it non-binding, legally non-binding.
Just so that we're clear with everybody, if there are folks that want this to go away completely, a way to do that would be to have X number of signatures that want it to be a binding referendum to be put down.
That is
binding,
correct.
Right?
The only way to do that, because there's nothing this board can do legally that would stop a future board or from members of this board who change their mind to reconsider at any time, legally. It's only the politically and the policy concerns. The only way to legally bar gambling and take it out of the board's control to allow it would be to run a citizen-generated binding referendum under the statute.
Help answer some of those? Because I know I've had a lot of people ask me about that, and it seems a little confusing to me, and so I just want to make sure that Lance had a chance to kind of explain it.
Right. Nothing would be legally binding about this, except to the extent that the board would be aware of public opinion. Okay. Which normally they only see the people that come to meetings. Theoretically, and it depends on voter turnout, you would, if theoretically, get a broader cross-cut.
What is it about the current process that you think the pro-gambling people aren't coming to meetings or writing to the newspaper to share their concerns or emailing you guys? I mean, it's not happening. So what is it about the current process that they're not willing to come and be on the record about being pro-gambling? Well, you seem to have spoken to the most, so I guess that's why I'm directing it to you.
Most of the folks that talk about it say they don't really care, they don't think it'll impact it, and it's just comments like that. And again,
Is that a pro then, or is that a...
I consider those neutrals. The only pros are somebody that reaches out to me and says, hey, I want gambling, or I want gaming, whichever term you want to use.
Yeah, I would say most of the people that have approached me, pro and con, have said that, and this is right or wrong, right? And I think that you touched on it a little bit early on, is that there's a little bit of a fear factor of the social media, and I mentioned this in the meeting on the 22nd, apologizing this trying to, there's a little bit of a fear factor of possibly being slammed on social media, and I think that's died down. I mean, I don't know, I'm off of it, but I think that intimidation factor was one of the reasons that some people that talked to me, they said, look, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to be part of that, the back and forth on social media, and I, look, I use social media to make fun of my friends on Facebook, and that's about it. But that's some of the feedback I've got. It's really probably the most common theme that's come up to me.
I just feel if they felt strongly enough about it, they would come to a meeting or write to you guys or do something more than just approaching one of you.
So from my perspective, I feel like I don't believe in governing with through referendum, but I do think that in this situation, I just think that this is one of those, that's why you have them. You have them for situations where they do make sense. And I think that this is a good opportunity for us to give everyone a chance to have a voice without having their finger pointed one way or another. I don't remember the 80s, fortunately. But I do know that that when they were agreeing to go from a dry town to selling alcohol, I know it was my mom has told me it's a very hostile situation. But looking back on it now, no one even mentions that, right? No one even mentions the fact that alcohol and drugs and cigarettes are addicting. And I just think that giving people the chance to vote is the right thing for me to do as a trustee.
I feel like they're given a chance to be heard here, and they're just not showing any interest in doing so. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a couple comments and questions, I guess. I still don't understand the basis for a referendum. And with regard to that, I feel like the question of referendum for the folks who were against gaming was not a please put this on a referendum. This was a if you are going to vote yes board, then put it to the public. So I don't think they were asking for a referendum, Joe. I feel like they were saying no, and if you're going to go against what we're asking you to do, then put it on a referendum. And when you look at it in that context, the number of folks asking for a referendum is very small, because it's really just the folks now who are anonymously asking for this to be a gaming town. So a couple things. I still think we have overwhelming public support against gaming. And most of the support that I've received, three supports in favor, 2 of them were anonymous, 2 of them were let's give it a try. Otherwise, I've received over 45 emails, 10 handwritten letters, obviously the public comments that we've received, petition with now close to 500 signatures. Overwhelming public support against. The Economic Development Commission is a commission that we tasked to determine this. They said no, it's against the brand of Riverside. I also have still yet to see, I asked for this at the last board meeting that we talked about this, I still have seen very little evidence presented that this will actually support economic development. Numbers have been thrown out about the amount that establishments might profit from this, but those numbers are kind of a boilerplate number that's thrown out at every community by the groups that are pushing and running these gaming machines. You're going to profit $50,000. You're going to profit $70,000. I don't think that that takes into account anything to do with the uniqueness of Riverside. We are saturated around Riverside with these video gaming terminals. So to tell me that we're going to get a huge influx of people gaming in Riverside, when I believe Berwyn, if you look at the numbers, has the largest number of video gaming terminals in all of the Cook County and local Chicago area. They are number 1, I believe. Obviously, we have the issue that the Economic Development Commission has been dealing with for years. Riverside is hard to find. We all understand that. So I don't know that gaming is going to be as successful here, because you don't have that that draw, that constant flow of people. We love it, but we don't have it. And I think then the other thing is the Economic Development Commission really focused on the fact that this is running afoul of the brand of Riverside. And I've not heard one person stand up and say otherwise on that. I do think a referendum is going to prolong this intense dialogue in an unnecessary way. And several trustees have said multiple times that we need to get back to the business of the board and deal with the things that we want to deal with next year in 2018. Prolonging this into March, to me, is going to monopolize our first quarter of time on this board. So I do think it's in the best interest of the village not to prolong this heated rhetoric. I do believe there's been ample opportunity across several platforms for businesses, people, groups to speak up regarding their support of the video gaming. No business is currently seeking it. And this to me is really important. I believe that if you are unwilling to publicly support an opportunity that changes the status quo, that may provide your business with an advantage, then you don't deserve that advantage. If you're not willing to support it publicly, I'm sorry. The last thing I want to say is that I think this board needs to think about their credibility in regard to this process. Because at the last board meeting, we considered whether to disrupt the status quo on another topic that people in Riverside are passionate about, the location of the Veterans Memorial. In that case, and as here, the status quo had been in place for many years. The location was established for the memorial, and we've had no gaming for many, many years. In that case, as in here, we tasked the commission, a commission, with making a determination on that matter. The Landscape Advisory Commission, the Economic Development Commission. In that case, as in here, there was strong public opposition to disrupting the status quo. In that case, as in here, there was minor support to the change. Except for the fact in that case, the minor support actually came from the commission that we tasked to determine the issue. The Landscape Advisory Commission actually recommended to move it. But there was such strong opposition that this board said that, quote, the decision was already made for us. And we didn't go to a referendum. We didn't have to go to a vote. Nothing was pushed forward because the decision was made. The public spoke. It's our responsibility to listen to the people who elected us. I do not believe we are elected to pass the buck on issues where there has been ample opportunity for both sides to be heard. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with, I think, everything that Trustee Peters just stated. I thought she stated it very well. As I said before, my concern with the video gambling is how it will affect economic development in the community. I feel like it will hurt our brand, that the potential negatives far outweigh the benefits. We're competing with Western Springs and LaGrange and Oak Park and Hinsdale and Clarendon Hills, towns like that, for residents, new residents, and new businesses. None of those communities allow video gambling. I think there's a reason why they don't, because they realize that it's not in their best interest. And I think our competitive situation in Riverside would be hurt by allowing video gambling. That thought came to my mind Tuesday evening as I was driving through downtown on a Tuesday evening, and the place was hopping. It was just, it was incredible. My heart was warmed. I was just so happy to see it. Hardly parking space available. And again, a Tuesday evening. And the thought came to me is we're on the verge of something great here in Riverside. I really do believe that. I think we're really on the precipice. And maybe we're there already. I mean, we've certainly come a long way. But we're on the verge of something, and I would hate to see us take any step that might hurt that. I agree with Trustee Peters regarding a referendum. The public, I think, saw that as a last resort when they thought that maybe this board was going to approve it, and that was the only reason there was any reach out or speaking of the referendum. I haven't heard from anyone who is in favor of a referendum or is in favor of gambling, quite honestly, but most of my Facebook friends are out of state. So, you know, the other thing I wanted to say too, and this is more personal than it is what's in the public interest, from a personal perspective, you know, on the issue of a referendum versus not a referendum. You know, we're trustees. We're not delegates. And by that I mean that being trustees, we're trusted to represent what we believe the public interest to be, not just delegated to do what the majority want. Having said that, and the reason I say that is even if there was a referendum and the referendum came back in favor of video gambling, I would still be opposed to video gambling in Riverside. So for that personal reason, I am not in favor of a referendum, and the other reasons that I stated as well.
So that's an issue of procedural question. Seems like there are two possible issues here. One is whether or not there is a majority support for having a question placed. And then the second question would be how should the question be worded?
Yes.
Should those be separated, or should we talk about the wording first? And
Need to be separated, but they certainly can be. Like, for instance, if some people are concerned about the wording but are in favor of the referendum and would vote against the motion to approve the resolution because of the wording, it would make sense to separate, because the wording can be basically whatever you want it to be because it's an advisory referendum. You just want to try to make it clear so you have some idea about what a yes means and what a no means.
so are there any, I share the concern that we heard from Ms. Morrison about the wording. I guess the only reason I would lean toward leaving the gaming word versus the gambling word is because that's how our current ordinance is already drafted, is it refers to gaming. But what are your thoughts about how the question should be worded?
I don't have an issue with changing to gambling.
Thoughts?
I want to just be clear with the village and get it. So whether it's gaming or gambling, I don't have any problem with it either way.
So change, okay.
If you think gambling was clear, I have no problem.
Okay, so
Right, and normally, if it were a binding referendum, you wouldn't do that because the gaming is in the statute, but because it's non-binding, you can do it.
right. Okay, any other discussion about this before we go to a vote?
I just, Lindsay Morrison again. One thing, one fundamental thing. Is anyone asking for this change? Publicly, is any business, is any that is going to act on this?
Not to our knowledge.
So that means, so full stop. Why are we talking about it? We're talking, why are we continuing to? There's no reason to have a change if no one is asking. Those of you who want a ballot referendum, then that means we're talking about this because you're not comfortable listening to the people and who've spoken publicly and making a decision. So we're having a ballot referendum for your comfort level, not because there's any action that's been requested by anyone.
I don't think that's the case. I think I agree that I'm torn about whether or not to have a referendum because I worry that of the other villages that had problems when they did have a referendum, but those were binding. So if we were talking about a binding referendum, I would probably have a totally different position there because I fear that that would set us up for not having the opportunity as residents to be able to manage it. I think the biggest issue that I have right now, and the only reason I think a referendum would be helpful, is that if the intimidation factor has kept people from taking this opportunity, that would vet that out. That's the only reason right now that I'm even considering that, is because of the way that it kind of all shook out over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So
there hasn't been anything much at all, and I don't know. I don't think I'm terribly intimidating, but maybe you do.
No, I don't.
And you and I
intimidate.
And I don't ride the train, so we haven't had a conversation on the train.
Yeah, no, I had other people riding the train with me
Just
that
so
had
you
good
know.
conversations. So
Okay,
and that's
good.
all I was trying to say is that, again, I'm like I said, I'm not a gambler. I don't gamble. I don't prefer to have the noise-making machines behind me when I'm having a pint. So I'm just trying to make sure that we follow the process properly. And when we have residents in the past that have come to the village with something that they wanted in our village, we've accommodated that by writing an ordinance up and then letting everybody look at it and see if they're comfortable with it. I don't feel that we've given the few folks that came that opportunity this time. That's really my only reason for doing that.
There was a draft ordinance on the 2nd and published ahead of that, so there's been more than a month. Wasn't there?
There's no draft ordinance ever prepared.
Okay.
And that's my position is that we aren't following a consistent protocol for those folks that originally came forward, which have been silenced some of which say by intimidation, threatening phone call. Wait a minute. That's what they're saying, and then they have the right to do that. I understand that. So the one thing that would vet that out is a referendum, non-binding, so then we still have control.
But then you're still
It's
not
the only reason.
consistent. You said you
Okay, we can't, if you want to speak, you need to.
The issue on also, how many people spoke in terms of the veterans, the other issue about moving the movement? How many veterans said, I want this to stay where it is?
Half a dozen.
Yeah, I don't.
Half a dozen. And how did that, and that was enough of an opinion of,
Totally understand what your position is on that. Again, the only reason that I would be for a referendum is so let's just play out the different ways it would happen. A non-binding referendum come in, and everybody but 2 people that votes against having gaming. That would send a huge signal to all of us, and I know exactly where I'd vote. I'd vote the same way Joe would. I would vote with my constituents. Because then we would have something that's like that, and then people wouldn't have any reason to come back and say that you didn't listen to me.
So should we put the Veterans Memorial on a
Yes.
referendum too?
I mean, obviously, I can see you guys are picking on the veteran as me.
no, we're not. We're picking on.
I don't have an issue. I got
think we
big
have a
shoulders. I got
credibility
really
problem
big shoulders, and I would like to finish. I have really big shoulders, and I don't have an issue with you picking on the veterans. But the problem that I had from the last meeting was we weren't following consistent protocol. When we had 2 people come in for Bs, we acknowledged that, we spent the time to come up with something, and then we voted on it. We never have done that yet. I don't even know if we could find something that could balance out those and those that are against, but we've never even tried it.
I just want to say, veterans are, I have a high respect for veterans, so I hope that you're not
Well, kidding
serious
around about it gets pretty serious pretty fast.
Yeah,
So.
well, the point that I was trying to make is that we were elected to make decisions, and we made a decision last meeting where there was opposition to it that was actually made public, and made by the commission that we commissioned to make the decision.
3 to 4.
So, 3 or 4 folks.
3-4 is how that vote went. So it was almost half and half, and it had a swing vote on it. If you talk to the commissioners on the EDC that were for gaming, they have a voice too, right? And so
One of
when we
them
say,
said,
when we said it was overwhelming EDC response, I don't buy that. It was a close vote, just like our vote's very close. Again, so I don't see the EDC as an overwhelming. I don't think it's part of our branding either. My biggest thing that I want to try and get across is that we're being fair to the few of us that have stepped forward in the last meeting that said that they would like us to consider an ordinance. Doesn't mean it's going to pass.
no one has said that.
Well, at the last meeting,
Also, by the way, one of your yes votes for the EDC only voted yes because, and specifically asked you, the board, to vote on it. And said, Gallia said, I am doing this because I want the board to vote on it. So they were not actually a yes vote on the issue, as a yes vote on asking you to take responsibility for it. I think from having submitted a FOIA response, which I assume, a FOIA request and gotten the response yesterday, which I assume you probably all saw the response as well, they're nowhere near the numbers in there of what I saw of any of the numbers in terms of support of gambling. So I don't know where that conversation is coming. I don't know, and people, there aren't names in there either. So the numbers in terms of who's favor or there's one person asking for a referendum, one person asking, specifically against a referendum, and one going, somebody should just have a binding. That was more of a flippant. So I don't know where that all is happening, and it's not happening in official public record when this kind of decision and discussion should be. So.
Well, I just wanted to clarify something about process. Because I'm sensitive to that, because I agree we should be following a standard process to the extent that we can, but from my recollection, we are doing that. When the Bs came up, before we drafted an ordinance, we had a discussion and there was a consensus to move forward. Just like tonight, we have a zoning issue on our agenda. We're going to discuss it. If there's a consensus not to approve it, but to consider it, then we'll draft an ordinance. Or that particular one will go to the Plan Commission, I assume. That's what we're doing here. Same thing we did with the bees and the chickens and what we've done with virtually every other regulatory policy of the village. We make sure that there's at least 4 people who at least want to talk about it. And then we draft an ordinance and dig into the details. And that's what we've done here. We have 4 people who say they don't want to talk about it anymore in ordinance form, and so we're not going to prepare an ordinance. Am I correct, or am I missing something?
Actually, he makes a good point, because what we got into gears with last time was a clarity on what his vote was.
No, we were quite aware of what his vote was. The problem was that technically, because he wasn't present, he couldn't cast a vote because he wasn't present. But we all knew where he stood.
So if you called that same vote again tonight with him here.
We did.
You did. You already did too.
That's what we did before we started this conversation.
I'm not 100% sure I got that process right, but I think
you are right, and I appreciate you saying it, because it's kind of my job to make sure that the process is properly followed.
Process is important.
And my point is exactly as you just stated. If there is not support for moving forward under any circumstance, then it doesn't make any sense to draft an ordinance. And that was where we were at the last meeting and at this meeting. So further conversation. I'm sorry.
Melissa Sweetser, 386 Bartram Road. I just wanted to know whether you guys have heard from the Chamber of Commerce on this. I mean, to me, it sounds like that they are somebody who should have an opinion and should voice it if they care about it.
The Chamber's position was that since no member business approached them and asked them to take a position, they chose not to take a position.
Okay, so to your point, Trustee Lumsden, about having consistency, this seems really inconsistent with any process that's happened so far. You just said that the bees, there were a couple people who were interested, you went through this whole process, and you took a vote, and you guys stood up for what you each believed in, and I believe that one passed. I don't understand where where we are, that why this has to be put to referendum. We have voted all of you guys into office or as trustees to represent either your beliefs or certainly the beliefs that you hear from people who live in this village. And right now there's consistent support for not having gambling in Riverside. Putting this to referendum is a waste of our money. How much time and money are we spending, our taxpayers' money, for writing up the referendum and spending more time talking about it and having attorneys' time talk about it? Trustee Lumsden, at a previous meeting related to a different matter, you were very adamant about writing resolutions and it being a waste of tax dollar money. So I think this is this should not go to vote in terms of going to referendum. So, thank you.
To put it on the ballot. There's no cost to us.
Administrative costs, there's your costs, then.
Well, I mean, the ordinances, the resolutions are added. The resolutions are added.
It's already given to us, so it's a little bit, and
there's no question cost is not a factor here, and also we don't have to have someone, with all due respect, we don't have to have someone come to us and ask us to make a change, so we can consider this even if no business is asking for it. It's a legitimate thing to consider,
So go ahead.
No, that's fine.
So I feel like the referendum is important, and one of the reasons I feel like it's important is, I know you guys are gonna laugh when I say this, but I do think that there's people in this community that were intimidated by what was done on social media. I was intimidated, so I'm one of those people. I was intimidated by the things that were said so much that I canceled out being a light viewer or whatever it was of some of those pages. I have friends in this crowd right now. Other people have come to me and said that they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be attacked on social media. That's fine. This is neither here nor there. I do believe that the referendum will answer the question in the end through a vote. I think that if it goes one way, that's the way it goes. If it goes the other way, that's the way it goes. Something that has been this contentious. I actually think that this has been the best meeting we've had discussing this. Listening to you speak was fantastic for me. And I think that going into this saying, hey, we are a small community. We are going to give everyone a chance to place a vote on this. And then as trustees, we're going to make a decision from there. I have to be honest with you. I'm much more concerned with what happened on Friday night on Burlington Avenue than I am about this topic. I'm much more concerned about the armed robberies on my block, a block from my office. I'm much more concerned about the fact that I'm fearful sitting in my office at 4:30 in the morning on Burlington. While I understand this is a very hot topic, I think that once we get past this and we look at as a community what we really need to do, we need to focus on the crime and the safety of this community. And that's not because of gambling, it's because of drugs. And that's what's happening right now. So, just my thought.
Hi, Christine Herbst, Chairman of the Economic Development Commission. Wonderful comments tonight. Wonderful comments for all the sessions that we've had on this topic. I mean, everyone brings a point of view that the rest of us haven't considered. So it's a wonderful discussion. I also appreciate that's an advisory referendum, and there could be unintended consequences of going that route of an advisory referendum. I'm so thankful that we are so open and inclusive, and I know I'm going to be going against some of you by advising not to go to a referendum. I appreciate where your hearts are, because it sounds like a great idea to get everyone's voice on this, like, get their voice on it. We're open, we're inclusive. But with a referendum, you don't get all of this nuance. A position comes up, and then someone else tags onto it and just, gets a little more nuance to that point of view and this and that, whatever. Referendums, yes, the voter turnout is not always great. People who haven't been following this for the last year and a half or so, all of a sudden pop in and go, what am I voting on, type of thing. And we have given ample opportunity for these types of discussions, conversations, and I'm so thankful for that. And that's why I'm involved in this town. It's a small town, I'm a small town gal, and we sit down and we talk about things. So I'm glad we're doing that. So I would highly advise, and I realize, you may decide to go to a referendum, and I'll still talk to you and shake your hand, and I'll still support you no matter what, because that's also part of the process, But I would highly advise to not go to referendum. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, this is Asha Carroll. I represent my husband today because he cannot be here. Unfortunately, he had to take another job to support the business. And I hear this discussion for such a long time. And if everybody is against the referendum, everybody don't know it's against or pro, why not? Why that's gonna change for you guys? Our village lawyer says it's not gonna cost you. So why everybody can have your opinion? We hear 500 people signed the petition. Where's these people now? How many meetings we have here? How many I was here? I do not see even 50 people. I'm sorry. So that is my opinion. If you wanna hear the voices, make sure the both sides can make the voice. And I'm sorry if somebody don't understand me. It's my English is my fourth language, not first one, so maybe some people have a problem to understand me, but I wasn't born and raised here. So, but I think for everything what my husband do for this village, he deserves to hear from both sides. Thank you. What? Brian Carroll, he's owner of the Molly's.
I just wanted to talk about the voter turnout. Traditionally, it's very low. Kristen Evans. So in 2015, it was 13%. That was just 991 residents. So I think that's something to consider when you're hoping for a broader, feel for public opinion. That's 991 residents. And I think what has been missing from this conversation for a long time is possibly an acknowledgement from every board member that hundreds of us have communicated with you, either in person or in the petition or through email or even through social media, that we are unhappy with the thought of gambling in our village. Can you acknowledge that, Mr. Pollack?
Acknowledge that you're opposed to video gambling?
Hundreds are opposed.
I haven't gotten that many emails.
Did you see the petition?
Yes. No, you're right. There were 500. Right.
Can you
Yeah,
acknowledge
sure, I
it?
saw the petition.
Can you acknowledge that hundreds of people, you're
Sure,
aware of hundreds of people?
Sure, I acknowledge that I got the petition, there was hundreds of names.
Yeah.
You're aware that hundreds of people are against gambling
I'm
in
aware
the
that
town?
hundreds of people signed the
That you
petition.
represent?
Sure, yes, I acknowledge it.
I acknowledged it last time. I know that there's far more that are vocal for.
Hundreds.
Or far more that are against, to get that right, than are for that have come forth, yes. I would acknowledge that in a heartbeat.
Because
That's why we were excited to see the petition. I wish the petition would have had 6,000 people on it. That we wouldn't be talking about it now.
So 500 isn't enough, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. You got to remember
What does it mean?
where we were at last time. Where we were at last time was, at least from the intel that I had prior to the petition being provided, was less than 0.5% had come forth. Now we have a lot more that's come forth. I totally acknowledge that, and I think that changes the dynamic right now. Right? And I think that it's important to realize that.
What, I didn't understand, like, if 6,000 names are in the petition, then that means something different to you than 500?
We wouldn't need a referendum then, that's for sure. Because that would be the whole village.
Ben, I know that you can acknowledge that hundreds of... Mr. Ballery, can you acknowledge that hundreds of people are against gambling?
I have many emails, and I acknowledge that you gave us a petition with hundreds of names on it.
That say they don't want gambling in the village.
They signed a petition that, yeah, it says that, but.
I mean, I just have a hard time.
I can't acknowledge who those people are.
Yeah, I
read your thing. And
we're going to talk in circles here forever. I guess where I'm struggling with is, what's the harm of a referendum? There's going to be a new board in 18 months. If we don't have definitive evidence either way, and I'm sorry, but I don't classify what you provide to us definitive evidence. If there's not definitive evidence either way, you're going to be talking about this again in 18 months probably, potentially. I would think if you want to put it to bed, get your 400, 500 people to come out to vote. There's no one in the village. Referendums, no one's here can advocate for the referendum. I have no intention of either personally or professionally advocating for a yes vote on gaming. But if there's no one advocating for it, then it should be a slam dunk if you've got 500 people against it.
We're not worried about the referendum failing.
Okay.
The point is, it's a matter of respect.
Okay. Okay, I just don't understand your
I
perspective.
feel there's a lot of disrespect for the community and for everyone who has stood up and said, we don't want gambling here.
No.
Hundreds of people. And we're still talking about, we're not really sure if they want it or not. We're going to have a referendum.
You know what, we've been dancing around a little bit here, but the rhetoric on social media was ugly. And whoever took it down, thank you, because
I don't know what you're referring to. I'm not sure.
There was a lot of ugliness in social media on this, and someone took it down, and that was good, because there were people outside this village that could see that did silence people. We heard, I don't want to put a spotlight on Molly's.
I don't know what you're referring to.
Excuse me, I don't want to put a spotlight on Molly's again, but they had threats made to them. You don't think that they were intimidated? They just withdrew it because they changed their minds? I see no harm. I don't like referendum, but I see no harm, and I think it's in your favor. If you think it is so overwhelming against gaming, let the vote show it and be done with this, unless you want to go through this again in 18 more months, potentially.
Well, it is unfortunate that discussion has gotten very ugly, and I think that's a point that's been made here several times, that we could just end it tonight and just let it go. And yes, even with a non-binding referendum, it could come up again in 18 months. So, I mean, I don't know if your logic is something that can be accepted right now.
Okay, I think we've talked this out. So the question before you is a motion to approve a resolution providing for and requiring the submission of a non-binding advisory public question concerning video gambling. And the question would read, should the Village of Riverside allow video gambling? And the referendum would be March 20, 2018. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
No.
Can I make a quick clarification,
Please.
just for technically? There was a motion and a second originally, right, on the language that was presented. So I think, Trustee Ballerine, are you willing to amend your motion to change gaming to
Friendly
gambling?
amendment,
And
yes.
Trustee Lumsden, are you willing to amend your second to reflect gambling rather than gaming?
I'm doing that based upon the residents asking us for
I
that.
understand, but I'm just saying,
Perfectly
just
fine.
procedurally, we need
Yep.
to, because the motion and second wasn't on that issue. Thank you, okay, we can vote.
Okay, so Trustee Pollak is nay. Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Sedovich.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
No.
Motion carries. Just to reiterate something that Trustee Sedovich said, that and Lance can fill this in even more. Once this decision has been made to go to a referendum, none of us up here can, in our official capacity, support or oppose the referendum using public facilities. So we won't be talking about this again in a public meeting like this. We are allowed, obviously, in our private setting to express our opinions about things, but in our official capacity, we will not be allowed to be commenting about the referendum moving forward. Nor will any village resources be spent on the referendum. Lance, is that accurately said?
That is a complete statement of the law. The one thing I would say, though, is that members of the public are not forbidden from appearing at a board meeting to make a presentation on it.
But we won't be able to do what we did tonight.
The board
We
cannot
won't be able
discuss.
to converse with you like we did tonight once this decision has been made. Okay? All right. Okay, moving on. Thank you all for coming. Is Mr. Pipel here? Next up, under considerations, we'll pause for a moment to let folks exit if they wish. This is a good chance to escape if you want. Or you're welcome to stay. Yeah. Next up under considerations is a discussion on zoning regulations for attached garages and their impact on the village's national landmark designation. Was Chairperson Pipel going to try to be here for this, or?
He was unsure if he was going to be here tonight.
Do you think
but he felt that I should be able to represent the commission's discussion.
Okay. Director Rapp.
This stems out of our...
Excuse me just a second. Scouts, do these bags up here belong to you guys? Those are yours? Okay, okay. Didn't want you to forget anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So this item stems out of our, for lack of a better word, renewal of our national landmark designation. We've had to reapply, and it's been in the hopper for going on 10 years now, but the lady who was handling it retired, and so it kind of got lost. So the National Park Service was back out over the summer to resurvey the village and take some updated photographs, etc. And as part of the conversations with them, as well as the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, now I guess just the State Preservation Office, because apparently the agency was closed down, they expressed some concern about teardowns and some of the new construction that's happening in town and its impact on our national landmark designation, specifically with the new construction that is being built that is primarily with the front-loading attached garages. So the preservation decided to discuss this matter at their August regular meeting, and they expressed their concern that although the zoning ordinance encourages rear-loading garages, it does not prohibit front-loaded garages. And although there's standards to minimize the negative architectural impacts of front-loaded garages, they're still being built. And they're having a negative impact on the village's character and therefore our landmark designation. Some of the commissioners' preference would be to ban front-loaded garages altogether. They explained that they're concerned that all of the new houses being built are being built with the attached front-loaded garages, and that if that trend continues, it is going to have a significant impact on our landmark designation. They noted that the impact of front-loaded garages is not necessarily on an individual basis, but you take it in the aggregate. And as more front-loaded garages are built on a block, that character is going to change. They noted that Olmsted's plan talks about the life of the street and inviting strolling and conversation, and by changing the focus to vehicles, with the front-loaded garages being front and center, we're shifting the focus to vehicles and not on that life of the street and not on the pedestrians and the residents. The original design by Olmsted was to minimize the view of pavement and to maximize the view of green space. Streets were depressed. Your focus was not supposed to be on the vehicles, but on the green space. Our landmark designation prioritizes the general plan, which includes the green space, our parks, our triangles, and parkways, and minimizes pavement in the parkway system. By contrast, attached garages introduce a significant amount of pavement in the front yards, which are visible from the street and public spaces. So, staff kind of looked at some other communities and what they do, historic communities and what they do regarding new construction, front-loaded garages, attached garages, etc. And a lot of them choose, rather than prohibiting things, to incentivize the preferred option of either a detached garage or a rear-loaded garage. So there are some options that we have to look at. This is a discussion item for you, and basically what we're looking for is just direction as to whether you want staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission to move forward with looking at revising our regulations on front-loaded garages, and whether that be to just ban them outright for new construction, or to just look at ways to incentivize doing something different, or try to further minimize the impact of front-loaded garages. So you've got copies of the minutes from the Preservation Commission's discussion, some pictures of the recent homes that have been built in town, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I have a couple things. One is I went through, I happen to have one of those old green ordinance books because I still like paper. And over the week I went through all the historic residences in Riverside. And we have 50 some odd historic residences. 7 or 8 of them have attached garages. The Coonley Estate has attached garage. The Playhouse has the schoolhouse has attached garage. The Free Arcs has attached garage. I mean, the Tudor on Bloomingbank has an attached garage. I mean, you know, I could see this conversation happen 20 years ago when they said, you know, we're having too many attached garages, when they were looking at all the homes built in the Baltus estates. And, you know, or 20 years before that when they were looking at some of the Art Deco homes that were built in town and they had attached garage. You know, this is just, I think this is just a progression. And I agree with Richard Ray when he said that he felt it was almost like an architectural committee then where they had to decide. I don't think that's, I think we should incentivize people to put it in the back, but you know, we're competing, as Doug said, for residents from LaGrange, Western Springs, Hinsdale. We're competing for the young millennials, and a lot of those young people, the reason they're building garages on the front of the houses because they don't want to plow a 250-foot driveway. They want to walk out of their kitchen and get into a warm car. That's what people are. That's what people want when they spend $700,000 to $1 million for a house. So I think we're following the trend, and Olmsted followed the trend. I mean, he was a progressive. I mean, I don't want to argue Olmsted because I know I'm always going to lose this. But you know, I remember somebody told me, and I can't remember who, but that one of the first streets that were blacktopped in Riverside was Delaplane, because Olmsted brought this blacktop machine in from France because he thought it was the coolest idea. You know, this thing that, you know, this thing that you have to have the garage way in the back, and then a lot of that was because that's where you put the horse, and you don't want the horse next to the side of the house. You know, that's common sense. So I think it's an overstretch, and I don't, you know, how many communities have the whole community that you have to talk about. I mean, a lot of these places have historical districts.
Correct.
So if we said a historical district and we limited, you know, if you know the first division was a historical district, you know, then maybe we can get somewhere. But I mean, I drove around way too many blocks over the last week, and I counted every house on the block, and I counted, you know, 50 houses, and out of 50 houses, 20% of them had attached garages, and these are all old houses. These are all what the National Park Service would consider, you know, contributing structures. So you have 10% of our historical structures have attached garages. You have, you know, if you drive around Gatesby and the Baltus estates, probably 60% of them have them over there. But I don't, you know, and you look at our lots. I mean, you look at, and I don't know the address, but you look at, there's so many houses. You look at Doc Hana's old house on the corner of Delaplane and Mishaw, that big, brown, beautiful home, has two attached garages. You couldn't build it any other way. I mean, it's just it's on a corner. You just couldn't. The guy couldn't have a garage. And there's how many? Or it's on a curve. How many houses do we have like that? I mean, that just don't. Their lots go into a point. I don't like them personally. I like my house. I like my garage. I like everything. But I don't think we should regulate against it.
Mr. Pollack?
First of all, I want to clarify, we're not talking about prohibiting attached garages, just front-loaded garages, right?
Just front-load attached garages is the discussion.
So there are examples of new houses in the village, newer houses, that have attached garages but aren't front-loaded. And it's a bit of a architectural challenge, more of a challenge, but it can be done, even on narrow lots. I mean, on a wide lot, it's easy to do, but on a narrow lot, it becomes more challenging. But it is very doable. We have examples around town. I am in favor of considering this further, having the Plan Commission look into this and come back to us with some information. I'm very concerned, I have been for a while, about seeing new houses, tear downs where they come in with two front-loaded garages, and I don't know how else to say it, but it's not pretty. in my opinion. And I do think it is a little bit like the frog in the pot of water on the fire. You know, the frog's dead before he realizes that there's a problem. And the frog in this case being our landmark designation. You know, once we realize and you know, that landmark designation is in jeopardy, it's too late. So I think we do need to consider this.
I'm glad you said that. I had a question about this because I met with the folks from the National Park Service when they were here. And I don't remember them, at least not to me, I don't remember this concern being expressed. Have they formally stated anywhere that they think this trend is somehow threatening to our landmark status?
I've not gotten anything formally in writing. I think it's more been in discussion, as specifically with the State Preservation Office, with them expressing their concern, and I think the National Park Service concern is more with what is being built and in the aggregate what that impact could be. We haven't had a lot of tear downs. We just haven't. But we have had some. So depending on the trend, it may not be something that happens in 3 years, but it could be in 15 years from now. All of a sudden we see what that impact of those tear downs and the new construction and everything being a front-loaded garage is. So I think that's more where the concern comes from. They understand tear downs within a district are going to happen. The issue is what's being then rebuilt in its place, and how is it going to, those individual things going to impact the designation, and how are our rules about how those things are built protecting our landmark designation. So I think that's more the conversation that was happening on that end. I think the State Preservation Office has even more concerns about tear downs in general, but that's separate, I think, from the National Park Service, who is specifically the ones that oversee our national landmark designation.
Mr. Jason.
Yeah, I think that I agree with Trustee Pollock that at least taking it into consideration is very important, especially if, whether it's verbal or in writing, the concern of possibly losing our designation. That's
What would you want to ask the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider? Do you want them to consider an outright ban? Do you want? I mean, I don't want to leave it nebulous for them.
Here's where this is going to get awfully uncomfortable. Is the fact that those newer designs, the cookie cutter designs that people may or may not like, I think are what's driving. The root cause of this is we got a whole bunch of houses going up right next to each other, they're all the same. And what I think is charming about Riverside is the variety that we all had when we moved in here 20 years ago that is starting to, with the tear down market. And this is going to be driven by the marketplace. But where it's really going to get uncomfortable is this isn't a direct, if we would come back and say that we want to have the garages in the back with long driveways, we're going to stop the tear down market because it's not going to drive to the millenniums like Joe was talking about. The bigger issue is that a young designer that probably did those drawings, that pushed that garage all the way to the forward, is doing it from a sustainable perspective to get rid of hard surface paving. Right? If you take a look at the density of a lot, when the garage is way in the back and the whole garage is now on a concrete slab and you have a huge turnaround to get the car turned around, the same challenge is when you sneak a vehicle in the 25-foot beside the house right across a property line or a shared property line, and then you add the big old long thing on the side so they can rotate in and turn it at 90 degrees into it. You just fill the whole lot up with concrete and hard surface, and we make our water reclamation portion of the challenge harder. So bring in, you'll hear in any sustainable design studio that I get a chance to be a part of once in a while, they're bringing the houses and everything as close as they can to the front of the street, driving public, they want the people and their damn cars all right up on the street in the front, and more park-like settings in the back in order to reduce the amount of surface. The developers are going to drive the same direction because of the cost of it. So the opposing piece to that is, especially in Riverside, our lot widths make it pretty difficult to do a house with a side garage without a big old piece of paving to get turned into there and then back out of there, right? And so I think that that's going to be a challenge. I mean, we're already when you end up running percentages of numbers on that. The other challenge that we would have at doing something like this is you might be able to do it on projects going forward, but then we have to talk about how we grandfather. Otherwise, any house that's currently a front-loaded garage that would want to do some renovation could be challenged, right? So we need to be smart about that if we choose to do it. I don't have a problem looking at it because I think a lot of folks have came to me, and here we go again, I'm going to get asked a FOIA for information, but when I talk to people around town, they are concerned about the newer developed projects that tend to have front-loaded garages, and the whole front of the thing on a 50-foot wide lot is a garage, right? And they're too wide, and they're usually 3 deep, right? I.e. there's 2 forward, and then there's 1 push back, because they're hitting the real estate pro forma that says 3-car garage, right? So that's going to be the challenges that we're going to have to try and dance through.
But again, if we're going to send something to PZC, I want to have some clarity to it. So I guess let me just ask this question. Is there any interest at the board level to abolishing or just not permitting front-loading garages outright?
I don't know yet. I don't think we can answer that yet. Someone's got to do the economic analysis. What's the impact on the housing market if we ban it outright? Someone's got to do that study. I would like the Plan Commission to look at all options, including a prohibition, what impact that would have, or if we can maybe get by with incentives or discouragements, carrots or sticks, that would reduce the number. Because as Sonia said and as I said, the issue's not any one building, one house. The issue is the proliferation of them. So if we can come up with something that would significantly reduce the number, maybe that's good enough. Maybe we come up with, and I know there are villages that prohibit front-loaded garages. I believe Western Springs prohibits front-loaded garages. That was part of their tear-down ordinance several years ago. So I'd like it'll be more open-ended, and just get input and then decide.
What does this side of the room think?
I think the first line in the code says it's discouraged, yet we do nothing to discourage it besides have that word in there. And I think that's maybe what we would like to see the planning and zoning better define. Incentives for non-front-loaded garages would probably be the best outcome. Maybe disincentives for having front-loaded garages as far as footprint and impervious surfaces and things like that, I think need to be discussed.
Yeah, no, I would like to hear more about this, but I do resonate with the sustainability issues that you've raised. I think that's something that we're going to hear more and more about, and that is something that I think millennials will latch on to. So that needs to be part of the discussion, because if there are disincentives, but we're disincentivizing something that is, great for the environment or better for the environment, that seems counterintuitive to Riverside's culture. So
I think the other thing too, the flat facade is another thing that I think people they're blaming it on the 2 or the double big garage door. You break that up and get a little bit more of a soffit, or soff it down, put some lights on the side. You can soften those elevations up that feel a lot better.
Requiring
it's just
2
the
doors,
developer-based piece. They do require
it. Do they require 2?
So, Director App, do you feel like you have enough direction
we don't
to take back?
require it to be 2 single doors, do we?
Yes, we
We
do.
limit it to 9 feet then, single 9-footers. That's good. That's a start to try and balance that out, right? Get the garages full.
So as Trustee Pollack mentioned, I have an attached garage that's in the back. I mean, there's other architectural ways to accomplish the same, the same goal. And I think there's also an issue with, in my mind, parking. It's not only the blacktop that tends to be out in front, or even if it's concrete out in front, then there's 2 cars that are always parked out in front. I do believe we have an ordinance that says the parking has to be in the side yard. That means no one can park in front of a front-loaded garage. It's not enforced. Maybe we enforce that. That softens it a little bit, but it's not desirable. And then when you have 2 cars parked in, and when you've got 2 or 3 homes together, you walk by and you see 6 cars in the front yard. So.
Yeah, but cars, I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of people that have garages in the back, that the car never gets farther than the front door. So, you resemble that remark? That's going to be a tough.
Throwing out ideas, but I think it needs to be.
Okay, so it sounds like the consensus is that we do want PCC to consider it.
Again, I agree with Doug and Liz. I think we need to do something. I don't think we need to blame it on front-loaded garages yet. I think we need to do something to respond to the concern, not only our historical position, but the residents commenting that we need to figure out some better way to allow this development to continue to help preserve and protect that.
What's the current setback in the front, in the street yard? How far back does a house have to be from?
Or is it separate from a front of the house?
That's another nebulous challenge.
Little hats and walk back a little while in time here, where we talked about street yards and front porches. So we defined a street yard as the distance from the closest point of the foundation of the house to the front property line. So that setback is going to be different for every single house in town. So nobody, I mean, they may have the same setback, but there's not like it's 25 feet and nobody gets closer than 25 feet like you would have in a typical suburb.
If I buy a lot and I want to put a house on the lot, how far back do I have to be?
It's taken by the average of your block face. So I look at your neighbors on either side and down the block and I average it out, and that is the setback that I give you by code.
Can you give me an approximate number?
I can't give that to you because it depends on the area that you're in.
My house sets back 25 feet, you know, and the house next to me, I mean, that's because I happen to be on a turn. I mean, I have a huge front yard.
But part of it,
I have nothing in the back.
The other thing that makes, and I understand your position on not being able to comment on that, is because the other thing is the houses may be back here, but the property line may be up here because the sidewalk's out here, or it may be way back here. And you were commenting before that you can have how far up your property line is. Right?
This was part of the discussion when we were talking about front porches, is I tried to do the survey of blocks and see where you were at. And in some areas, it could be very consistent and it could be very small. So you could have some areas where all of the houses are maybe somewhere between 17 and 25 feet setback from the property line. You may have other areas where the setbacks range from somebody being as close as 27 feet to somebody being close to 70 feet back from the property line. You know, so there is that there can be that great level of variance within a block, just because that's kind of the beauty of how Riverside was laid out. So
do you feel like you have enough direction from the board?
I think so. I think we can start working at the
If you can have them look at existing conditions to help promote adaptive reuse of existing structures, that would be very helpful. Again, because if we get too rigid on people not being able to reuse a good portion of the structures that the environment has already provided for us, then we're going to promote tear downs. And that, again, from a sustainable perspective, is as much of the product that we can use that's already been pulled out of the earth. We need
No,
to
I think that's an interesting perspective, because I mean that can be something that we look into, some sort of guideline that we can provide, that we can give to people that are looking at that. Because I mean, let's be honest, the average person does not necessarily know how to adaptively reuse a house that they're looking at buying. I don't know how that's going to work. Not everybody's necessarily going to easily be able to find an architect that's going to know how to be able to reuse that. And so the easiest solution is everything's rotted, we're just going to tear it down and go new.
But it might incentivize the developers to adaptively reuse a portion when they buy a piece of property, rather than go with the financial best performer and tear down. That would be a good thing. It would help prolong the visual change in our wonderful village. So.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
We do have on our ordinances that front-loaded garages or garages in the front of the house have to be two separate doors.
Yes.
Okay. I own a house that has one big double door.
Is it attached to your house?
Okay, wait a minute. I do not own a house that has.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Just so hypothetically, I own a house that has a attached front garage. That's a front-loading garage that was built in the 50s.
Okay.
And I'm going to. and I'm going to change the house around and do some other stuff and move things around. Do I have to bring my garage in to be conformed?
I believe so.
Okay. I mean, or did we grandfather all those houses in? That they don't have to do that? Or, I mean, I think that's, I mean, you...
And this is a good point. And again, because if we incentivize people to break up their doors, because again, a sustainable perspective again is going to be to have separate garage doors rather than one big garage door, so that when you bring one car in, you don't open up the whole volume of that space to the cold or the hot air, right? So there is a sustainable position. Again, if we incentivize sustainable decisions as a part of this, I think that that's the way to trigger to get people to do smart stuff, right? And you de-incentivize the most cost-effective, low-dollar, flat facade that is what I think people are responding to.
Can I ask a question, Trustee Bellarine? The code provides an answer to, it would be non-conforming structure, and there's a general provision that does grandfather non-conforming structures. They can be maintained, but if they're destroyed to a level of 50% or more of their market value, they need to be brought into compliance. And that's subject to different interpretations of the, like a garage can be looked at, but there is a general rule, and that is it.
So depending on what you're doing, I'm not going to make you, if you're not touching your garage, you're just putting a second-story addition over the other side, or you're putting an addition over your garage, that's not going to trigger me making you redo your garage to make it 2 doors.
Okay.
It's just, you know, that's a small change.
Right. And sometimes we get into fights over that when somebody wants to maintain a legal non-conforming structure that's been damaged, and then we're fighting over what is that value, because you can have appraisers that will give you different numbers. But the general rule is what I told you.
Okay, we're done with that one. Let's move on to our last discussion item, which is regarding the property tax assessment freeze program.
So as I said before, we're having lots of talks with the National Park Service and the State Preservation Office. Currently, there is a tax assessment freeze program in the state of Illinois. The village does not participate as part of this program, and historically annually opts out of this particular program. Back in March, we had representatives here that gave a presentation on that program to you. The State Preservation Office and the Park Service have expressed some concern about the impact of demolitions, and so on our landmark designation, so the Preservation Commission decided to have a discussion on this matter. The Property Tax Assessment Freeze Program, it's a financial incentive program that's utilized to incentivize reinvestment in historic properties. The program is a 12-year program where eligible properties have their assessment frozen at its current pre-rehabilitation value for a period of 8 years. And then over the next 4 years, the assessment value is stepped up in even increments until it reaches the post-rehabilitation assessed value at year 12. The village's tax rate is not affected by the program, it's only the assessment value. And eligible properties have to meet certain criteria. So in Riverside, since basically our entire village is a landmark district, any contributing structure within our landmark district is eligible, and then any of our landmark designated homes are eligible.
What would be a contributing structure?
A contributing structure is any structure that has been built before, I believe, 1960 and is largely intact. It's a very low bar. So that being said, next criteria is that it has to be owner occupied, so it can't be a rental unit. It must be a substantial rehabilitation, so it has to be greater than 25% of the assessor's fair cash value of the building during a 24-month period. And then additionally, the work proposed for the rehabilitation has to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, i.e. preserving the historic features and materials of the outside and the inside of the structure. So those are the criteria to be able to be eligible for this program. So the criteria are pretty stringent. You're not going to see a lot of people actually take advantage of this particular program, should we allow it. That being said, the Preservation Commission, in their discussion, talked about the fact that This program would be most beneficial probably for your larger properties. So this could have been something that was very beneficial for, say, the Coonley estate, when it was going under rehabs or when part of it was in foreclosure. This could have been a program that could have been helpful in getting that taken care of perhaps sooner. The commission believed that that our village and the prestige that we have with our national landmark designation, that it's a bit unusual and unique that we do not participate in this program. And I think that was mostly their primary concern, was that given who we are, the fact that we don't participate in this is a bit unnerving. So their recommendation is that since this is something that not a lot of people will actually take the time to take advantage of, if you're just rehabbing a bungalow here in town, this is probably not a program that's you're A, going to utilize, and B, is going to be useful for you. But if you're going to be investing in one of our larger Victorian mansions or something along those lines, this is a program that could be helpful. So their recommendation was that we stop opting out of the program and allow our residents or future residents the opportunity to take advantage of this program. Additionally, it came about that Riverside is one of the last communities, taxing districts in the village to opt out of this particular program. Now we are actually the last taxing body to opt out of this program. So Highland Park and their school districts, I believe, were the other areas, taxing bodies that opted out of the program annually, and they actually just reversed course on that back in, I believe, September and October, and are not going to opt out of the tax assessment freeze program anymore. So that would leave the village of Riverside. So I can read the Preservation Commission's recommendation, and they said that given the village's status as a national landmark designation, the commission thinks it is unusual that Riverside is one of the few historic villages that opts out of the property tax assessment freeze program, which based on the documents received would have a minimal impact on the village's tax revenues in the short term and could be beneficial in the long run, and recommends that the village board stop opting out of the property tax assessment freeze program in the coming years.
How many of those communities would conclude almost every house in the community?
There's very few.
Okay.
I mean, there's some communities that have several historic landmark districts. But, it's not the entire community. But even given that, one of the numbers that was thrown out is if you look at Oak Park, which has several historic districts, of all of their properties, less than 0.5% village-wide take advantage of the tax assessment freeze. And it's not much bigger when you just roll it down to the housing stock within those districts. It's at like 4%.
Okay, but now let me go back to your analogy of a small bungalow in town. Mm-hmm. $350,000, $400,000 bungalow in town. You bought it, and realistically, if you invested $80,000 in it, you can freeze your taxes for 12 years. If you were going to strip all the wood and bring it all back to life like it was in 1920. So, dust up all the stained glass windows, replay the windows, you would be able to do that.
There's potential, yes.
Okay, so that's an $80,000 investment in a $400,000 home. So it's not just the big Victorians that we're talking about. It could actually be quite a fair percentage. And what they're asking all of the residents to do is subsidize that, because if the village is going to collect $6 million, they're always going to collect $6 million. If your taxes are frozen, somebody else is going to pick up that difference, and that difference is going to be picked up by the rest of them. So with that being said, I wouldn't have a problem with this if the homeowner that went for this had his house put on the historic landmark of the village, and then from then on had to follow all the criteria that the preservation has to put on. Because when you have a landmark home in this town, you have to make sure that your shinglings are right, that you put shutters on the house, it has to be right, you put anything you have to do it right. And if you do that, you are in essence affecting my property value, because the more houses that do that, the better my house, the better we all look. So I wouldn't have a problem if we attached that to it. But to just simply give it to somebody that's going to invest to bring their house back, I don't see that just because of the magnitude that we have in the village. But I think
I understand that, and I think the Preservation Commission's position is in actuality,
we don't know that.
People don't do that.
But when this was put away in the late 90s, we had probably half a dozen homes on that were taking advantage of this, at least a half a dozen, and there was some sizable tax credits. It was a long. That's when it went away. I think it was 90, 92, 93, something like that. But I don't have any problem doing it if the person that owns the house wants to be on the landmark.
Mr. Paul?
Does the law allow what Trustee Ballerine is suggesting?
I don't think so, but I don't know. I don't know if we could create like
I'm not so sure.
because I think it's like an opt-out. It's like a state program. We can opt out. I don't know that we can not opt out with exceptions, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah,
I think the other thing, Joe, I think would be a problem. I'm not so sure every home that would be eligible for the freeze program would be part of the historic.
It definitely would not.
Yeah, that's my point exactly.
The whole bunch.
Yeah, that's my point.
So just in terms of institutional memory, I mean, when this has come up in the past, one of the arguments that's been made against it is specifically to your point, that what you're really asking residents to do is to subsidize the renovation of a Coonley estate, of a very expensive, large property. And the sense in prior years has been those folks have the wherewithal to do it without being subsidized by the rest of the taxpayers in the village.
I think it would be helpful to explain how it's subsidizing.
Well, because of what Trustee Ballard says, we're going to get the same tax levy.
Yeah, so our tax rate goes up.
Yeah, so if I it's just like the TIF. If I freeze your property and your tax rate doesn't keep going up, somebody's going to make up that difference, and that somebody is the rest of the people who aren't availing themselves of the program.
And it also would affect the village a bit. It wouldn't completely unaffect the village. The reason is that when you redo extensive rehabs and those properties are reassessed, the year they're reassessed, that's new growth. And that new growth is not subject to the tax cap. So that's why you balloon levy to capture all the new growth. We have an estimate of the new growth, but the actual number isn't fixed till later. So if that new growth is not available, you will lose your new growth for that year, and it would be postponed. And I don't know, probably when it comes back on the tax rolls, it's subject to being new growth, but I don't know. If it's not, you never capture the new growth, because you'd always be capped. You see what I'm saying? Your cap limits what you can levy, but new growth is not included in the cap. So you would lose that proportion of the new growth in your balloon levy for that year.
So given that, what do you think? Do you think we should continue to opt out?
I'm inclined to not opt out, but I think the question is, there's no question that the other taxpayers will subsidize that difference. The question is, and there's no question too, that the other taxpayers will benefit from that investment, because any investment in property in this village benefits all properties to a degree. Maybe real small, but it does. So that's the balance, is does the subsidy, is it offset by the improvement to the community that results and the benefit that everyone enjoys because of that investment? So I'm inclined to give it a try, but
I would think that before a house gets accepted for a demolition permit, that the preservation has to give that house the go-ahead. right? I mean, they look at all the criteria and they say, well, it's okay, this house doesn't fit the standards. And so it just doesn't seem like this is squaring that box. I just don't see it. I haven't seen any historic structures that have been torn down. I don't see any. I'm trying to think of anything other than the Baltus estates. Where have we lost? So I don't know.
Do we have to make this decision tonight?
We just have to make a decision whether or not to ask them to do more.
Yeah, I would like to just see some back of the envelope. It looks like Oak Park and Geneva, the two that they gave us at 4% of basically houses that qualified elected this. I just like some, and I would say it's probably a cap. I'd like to kind of get a rough idea on, since it's our whole village, but it's limited to 1960 or earlier, some rough percentage of our homes that would qualify and what that assessed value is, and then what 4% of that would be. And we might be talking $5 a resident or something, and it might be an easy answer, but I'd kind of like to see that number.
Isn't there a deadline?
There is. So we do have to take action on the opting out in January, at the January board meeting. So we would still.
Which January board meeting?
Before the end of January.
So it has to be before the end of the month.
Yeah, so it could be either meeting in January. It could be the second.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see if there's a consensus one way or the other, and we can still get more information. But where are people at right now?
I think gathering more information, for me, I think having more information is important.
So what is it you want to know?
I mean, I think that what Trustee Sedley just said with regard to understanding how it's going to impact the other residents is important. And if we can figure that out from if we can calculate that somehow. I think this is a little bit broad.
I'm trying to make, how would we?
I think it's pretty easy. You figure out a rough idea of what percentage of the housing stock here is 1960s or older, and take that percentage of the assessed valuation, you take 4% of that number, you freeze the tax on that, and then you can figure out what's being assessed. So
you're taking like a worst case scenario that
that's best case. 4%. You might want to take 10%.
I'm okay with 4% just because we have two comps that's what the numbers are. 4%. I mean, my sense is it's probably not a huge number, and I know it's not going to be completely scientific, but I know it's.
We could probably get. We'd have to look at the limitation of our system, or we'd have to go individually through our house files. But we could get the percentage.
We just show number of new home building permits since 1960.
No, we actually have a list.
Okay.
That was part of our original survey for our application renewal that lists all of our contributing structures. So from there, we would just need to weed out anything that's commercial structures
Right,
or multifamily structures.
What percentage, what are the assessment values of each of those homes we do not have?
See, that's what
we might be able to get that with our GIS system.
Okay,
Yeah, he wants a broader number than that. I think. He's saying take the total EAV, right, of the village.
And then look at that
and then
percentage.
look at, and just assume that it's all an average out somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not looking for scientific. I mean, honestly,
so we're basically we're going to assume that everything is a contributing structure or a landmark.
That's 1960.
No, we're going to look at a percentage of our housing stock. So our contributing structures are 60% of all of our structures, our properties. Then we can say 60% of our total assessed value.
EAV, and then assume that 4% of that participates.
So that's what we need for January.
Would Oak Park be willing to share with us information? And they have to have this number that we're trying to calculate for the 4% that they have. They have to have figured that out at some point. Do we know that?
I don't think you want theirs.
Well, but I understand that there's differences. But my point is that do we even have any idea of what that looks like from Oak Park's perspective? If they're one of the two that has a 4%, I think it's worth finding out.
The village wouldn't have Village of Oak Park wouldn't have the assessed value for those particular properties.
But they might know how much the increase of each of their taxpayers went up.
Yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, they could estimate it. Like it's what finance directors do when they try to project a budget increase of what's the likely increase on an average house in the community, and they'll pick like a median price, and then it's very variable because it's affected by a lot. But they'll say, we estimate the average increase of property owner of a $400,000 house would be $15 a year or $30 a year. But you don't really know. But they do those numbers. That's what I think you're looking for.
My last question is if somebody takes advantage of this freeze and freezes their tax in year 1, and somebody else has the same house at the same assessed value.
Well, let me just clarify. They're not freezing the tax. They're freezing the EAV.
Okay.
Their taxes could fluctuate.
Okay, they freeze the EAV. The house next door is identical home, has the same EAV. They were, okay.
Yeah.
So 12 years, the taxes or the EAV on this house goes up. Is this home that was frozen going to go up in the same, going to get to the same point, or because we missed all those CPIs in the middle?
Oh, you're saying at the triennial reassessment.
Right, if you miss all those
Is this
things.
house included? My understanding is that they're reassessed as they are, but they're not, their EAV, it's not used to levy. You know what I'm saying?
No, my understanding is that the EAV is frozen for 8 years, and then it's stepped up. So that by year 12, under your example, it would be brought up to where the other house is.
Well, right, eventually, but I think what Trustee Ballerine is asking is a separate question, because what he's saying is during the years it's frozen, before it starts being stepped up, there are going to be at least 2, maybe 3 triennial reassessments of all properties in the village. And I think what he's asking is, even though it's frozen, for tax purposes, is it subject to those triennial reassessments to up it so that when you get to year 8, you're starting from where it would be when you start to ratchet it up on the percentage from properties that have been upped well along with it, correct?
Yeah, that's great.
Did I get it right?
You made me sound a lot
that's
smarter
not what
than
I heard. That's a better question. Yeah, I like this question better than
Well, was I clear? Did that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes. It's a lot clearer than I am.
But what's the answer to it? So that's the question.
Yeah, the answer, I don't know, but I believe that this ratcheting up is not like reassessment, triennial reassessment. It's like the 7C from the county or the 6B program where it's your EAV goes up and it is what it is. It's assessed like everything else. And then you start kicking in like 25%. If it's over 4 years, my guess is
25%, it goes up 25%
50,
each
75,
of whatever that difference is. So at some point, it does get reassessed, and then whatever that difference is, they do it in 25% chunks over that 4 years until you get to the new.
It would be triennially reassessed. So when you would start in year 8, it would be 25% of whatever the original reassessment was when you did your new development, plus any triennial reassessments that were included. It would start from that, then you take 25% of that, 50, 75, and then 100. So that you would...
Because what worries me is just what you sent out last time is when there's this thing that's being proposed in Springfield, freezing the taxes. And then if you freeze it 1 year, the compounding effect of that over 8 years.
So can we need that.
So
we need that.
I'll
And then also the point that you made about new growth.
Yeah, the new growth, that's a question I'd like to know the answer to because...
So that means you won't charge us for that one.
Yeah.
I got one more.
Okay.
Is it transferable? What happens if...
It is not transferable to a new owner. If a developer does this, they can, when they sell the property, like if they're doing the renovations to flip the house.
How can a developer be owner occupied?
There's an exception in there. They can, before the process is finalized, so they're already investing in this and doing this, they can assign that right over to the new owner that they're selling it to. So it's still kind of an original owner that's getting it, and then it's frozen for that new owner. But they can't, if they decide to live there for 2 years or whatever and then sell it, it's not transferable to that next owner.
Yeah, the law would treat the developer who never lives there and flips it as if they were the owner's contractor, you know, that's.
Actually, that
Basically.
makes me like it even more, because then that's gonna incentivize you to have to reuse.
Okay,
That's the state's position, yes.
so we'll get that
All
information.
right, we've got direction.
There's no new business. We do have a need for an executive session tonight to discuss the sale of village property and also the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee. Before we adjourn, we're not going to have a second meeting in December, so this is our opportunity to wish everyone at home Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and a safe and prosperous New Year. So with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session by Mr. Lumsden. By Ms. Peters, please call the roll.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick. Trustee Peters.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.